2010 through 2014 Hyundai Sonata with the 2.0 liter turbo engine, valve cover gasket replacement. I'm Brian Essick from How to Automotive. I'm going to walk you step by step through the process of changing out the gasket. The first step you need to do is pop off the top engine cover. You're just going to lift straight up and pull off and set aside. We're going to be removing the high pressure fuel pump, so we need to bleed off the fuel pressure from the system. To do that, what we do is remove the relay, and I printed out this diagram here to show you where the relay is. Remove the relay and crank the engine and start it up and let it run until the engine stalls, and that will bleed off the pressure. The relay box is on the driver's side under the hood. We're going to get started by removing the wiring harness here. To do that, you're going to need some needle nose pliers and put them in here and squeeze the little tab, and that'll allow the harness to pop up. After you get the harness popped up, you're going to take off the vent line here from the PCV. So you'll pull the hose off the PCV valve right there. Now we're going to unplug the electrical connectors for the high pressure fuel pump. The coil here, there's also a little bracket here we're going to remove. We're going to unbolt the coils, unplug all the coils, and pull those out and set them aside. To unplug the coils, we need to pull the safety catch first. So you'll pull this little gray tab toward you, and then you can squeeze down on the electrical connector and pull off. To make quick work of removing the coils, I'm going to use my little Milwaukee M12 hex drive 1/4 inch impact driver here. Tools like these are very helpful when you're doing these type of jobs where you're removing a lot of fasteners. So I'm just removing all 4 of the bolts for the coils, and then there's one little bracket that's holding a wire loom onto the valve cover. So after removing the bolts, you can go ahead and pull the coils out and set them aside. The wire loom for the coils are bolted down, so we need to remove 2 10mm bolts. They're right here on the corners here. So go ahead and remove these 2 bolts, then you can pull the wiring harness upwards like this. Now that we got the electrical connectors all unplugged and the coils removed, the next step is going to be to take off the fuel lines from the high pressure fuel pump here. You're going to need to take this little orange tab here on the fuel line and pull it upwards. And then there's little tabs on the side where you can squeeze and then pull the hose off. Before I take the hose off, I went ahead and cracked the metal line here loose using a 19mm wrench, and then because these can have some residual pressure on here, so I backed that off a little bit to make sure that there was no additional pressure on the line. Now I'm going to use my Lyle pliers designed to take these type of fuel lines off. You just squeeze the little tabs on the side, and then you're going to pull the hose off. There still could be a little bit of residual fuel pressure, so you want to be careful and maybe wear safety glasses when you pull these lines off. Now that you got the 2 lines disconnected, you can go ahead and remove this vent line here on the side of the valve cover. Go ahead and pull this hose off. Then we'll be able to lift the wiring harness here up and flip it out of our way, and then we can get to the bolts and start unbolting the valve cover. To get a little bit more slack in the wiring harness here, you can pop this little clip here. You can pull the little tab back and pull the wiring harness off the little bracket here, and then that'll give you a little bit more room to flex the wiring harness out of your way to get access to all the bolts. I also unplugged the oxygen sensor here in the back to get more slack, and you just pull this little red tab back, and then once you get the little tab pulled back, you can squeeze the connector and pull it off. And then that'll give you a lot more flexibility to get the wiring harness out of your way so you can get to all the bolts. So once you get that done, you can go ahead and take the 2 bolts holding the high pressure fuel pump on. Once I got that bolt loosened, it sprayed a little bit more fuel, that residual pressure that was in the line. So you want to be careful for that. So now you can go ahead and just lift the high pressure pump out and set it aside. Now we're going to start removing around the perimeter of the valve cover. We're going to remove all the bolts. They're all 10mm bolts. I'm using my Milwaukee M12 1/4 inch drive hex drive impact gun here. A couple of the bolts on the manifold require a wobbly socket to get to the bolt. One by the PCV valve, and then one right here to the right of the high pressure fuel pump. There's like a little bracket kind of in the way, so you can use a wobbly socket. And you can lightly flex the fuel line here with your thumb to create just enough room to get to the 2 bolts. So to get to the bolts that I'm using the wobbly sockets with, I do it all with hand tools, not the power tools. So once you get these bolts removed, then you can go down the center of the valve cover, removing all the bolts. Now that I got all the bolts removed, I used a bungee cord to hold the wiring harness back. Then I used a pry bar and pry it on the corner of the valve cover to pop it up. And once you get it popped up, then you can kind of lift the valve cover up, and you have to kind of angle it kind of like to clear the little bracket on the front. And you kind of give it a little twist and angle it at an angle towards the front like this, and the cover will pop off. Now that you got the valve cover off, we're going to clean up the surface of the cylinder head here. So we're going to go all the way around the perimeter, making sure all the oil and debris is removed and scraped off. You can use rags with carb spray or brake clean. You can use scrapers, razor blades, whatever you need. And also on the two corners here, there's going to be some silicone we need to remove, so use razor blades to scrape that all off. So the valve cover on this vehicle was leaking right behind the high pressure fuel pump here. You can see where the oil is puddling up on the manifold. Now that the cylinder head is cleaned up, we need to remove all the old gaskets from the valve cover here. So you're going to pull them out the tube seals here. There is a separate gasket here for where the high pressure fuel pump went around, so you need to remove all the gasket material from the valve cover. I'm going to be installing factory gaskets on this job. I will link these up in the description of the video. That way if you need to pick any of these up, you can find those there. Once you get all the gaskets removed from the valve cover, you can clean this all up. You can use brake clean or parts cleaner and clean everything up as best you can. So when I was installing the gasket, it kept falling out, so I used 3M super weather adhesive and put a thin bead into the track of the valve cover and then put the gasket on. A thin layer does really well for holding these in without causing problems. Now you need to use a little bit of black silicone and put it on the corners where the timing cover halves meet the head. And I use the right stuff. I'll link that up in the description. After you get the silicone dabs on there, now we're going to install the valve cover back into position. So we need to tuck it under the fuel line here and then position it and kind of slide it in at a little bit of an angle and kind of take your time. And you want to make sure that the wiring harness doesn't get caught underneath the valve cover and get pinched between the cover and the cylinder head. Once you get the valve cover to seat, then I use a dental mirror and look around the entire perimeter of the valve cover to make sure that the gasket did not fall off, and double check that the wiring harness is not pinched between the gasket and the cylinder head. After that, I start all the bolts by hand and run them all down until they're snug. After that, I tighten them all up by hand. I tried looking up the torque spec, but I could not locate it. So what I do is start in the middle of the valve cover and I tighten the center bolt first. So I run it down to it's snug, and in about a quarter turn or so more, then I'll move to the outer bolt in the center and tighten it down to a quarter turn until more, and then the very back bolt in the same line, and then I work in a crisscross pattern from the middle, then the outer, and then back, and then and I just keep working back and forth, kind of working like where you're spreading from the inside out. After tightening all the bolts on the valve cover, the next step is to reinstall the high pressure fuel pump. So you'll position it on, and then you'll start the two bolts. So I started these two bolts by hand, and then I used a ratchet and worked left and right, so drawing the pump down level. So I tightened it up a little bit on the left bolt, and then I went to the right bolt and just kind of worked back and forth until the pump was drawn all the way down and level. And then I tightened them down by hand. So I tightened it till they were snug, and then about a quarter turn more. After I got the pump tightened up, then I installed the metal fuel line onto the pump. I had to push it back into place after flexing it out of the way to get to a couple of bolts, so I had to push it back in to line it up. Then I threaded on the fastener and then tightened it down with my 19mm wrench. Before installing the second fuel line, I went ahead and put the coils back into position, started the bolts, and went ahead and used my impact tool here to run them down until they were snug and tightened them up. I will be sure to link this tool up in the description of the video. Having a tool like this makes my life easy, and I think it would make your life a lot easier too. After getting the coils installed, now you can take your bungee cord off and reposition the wiring harness back into place, and you can start plugging in the coils and making sure all the safety catches and everything are re-secured. So the wiring harness will just lay down, and you can pretty much tell exactly where everything plugged back into. It's kind of molded and shaped towards the way everything was plugged in. So go ahead and plug everything back in. The high pressure fuel pump, everything, go ahead and plug those back in. And once you get everything plugged in, then you can start the two 10mm bolts that held the wiring harness down and bolt that back down. Also, there was a 10mm bolt holding a bracket for the wiring harness on the back side of the valve cover. Go ahead and reinstall that. Once you get all the connectors reconnected and the bolts holding the wiring harness down and brackets bolted back up, then you can push the fuel line back onto the high pressure fuel pump. You want to push it on until it clicks, and you want to give it a pull, make sure it doesn't pop back off, and then you want to push the little lock tab on the fuel line back down until it seats. Now on the front of the valve cover, you can go ahead and reinstall the PCV hose and put the clamp on, and then run the wire that went over the valve cover back over and put it back into the position and plug in the oxygen sensor. Once you get the oxygen sensor plugged back in, then you can go on the opposite side here and put the vent line that went on the other side of the valve cover. Go ahead and put that on and put the clamp back on it. Now you're ready to start the vehicle and check for leaks. If everything's good, you can go ahead and put the top engine cover on. You'll just line it up and push it straight down. It's just held on with some rubber grommets. So you'll push that on until it's secure. I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. I'm Brian Esser from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching my videos, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.